Egunon, buenos días a todos. Voy a presentar a Peter, así en castellano. Peter, do you mind if I do the introduction in Spanish?
Absolutely,
Okay.
go for it.
So,
Don't say anything bad about me.
Okay. I'm sure you are able to understand. Simplemente una breve presentación. O sea, yo soy Juan de Los Ángeles, de C4E, más o menos que colaboramos con BBK en la organización del Trends Forum. Y durante la organización del BBK del Forum de este año salió a colación de por qué no montábamos algo para colegios, basado en el trabajo que Peter hace con escuelas en todo el mundo a través de su fundación Teaching the Future. No es una fundación exactamente, pero es una fundación, una empresa sin ánimo de lucro para distribuir el pensamiento sobre futuros en los colegios. Entonces, simplemente quería compartir con vosotros la historia de cómo descubrimos a Peter y cómo descubrimos Teach the Future y el interés que podía tener y por qué surgió esta sesión. O sea, nosotros en el BBK Trends Forum lo que hacemos es identificar gente que se dedica a tendencias o a pensamientos de futuro en el mundo, con idea de que ayude a empresas o instituciones en el cambio, en la innovación y también a situarse en el mundo, en un mundo que es como muy cambiante. Y a través de algunos de los ponentes del año pasado y de gente que tiene contacto con nosotros, descubrimos que que había unos voluntarios de Teach the Future. Entonces dijimos, ¿Teach the Future? ¿Y esto qué es? Entonces empezamos a ver qué era. Claro, nosotros siempre hemos creído que las tendencias no solo son algo que te ayuda a ver el futuro, sino que tienen un potencial de cambio de la sociedad. Pues las tendencias te ayudan a, construyen la habilidad hacia el diálogo, el valorar a los contrarios. Claro, una persona que se dedica a tendencias, cuando a alguien le llegue la contraria, no está pensando, prepárate que voy, sino lo que piensa es, oye, qué interesante. Cuéntame más, que me interesa. Entonces, esas habilidades de estar abierto a la opinión de los otros, de escuchar, incluso de buscar a los contrarios a propósito, para aprender tú más, de pararte, pensar y darle una vuelta a las cosas antes de empezar, de buscar inputs para diseñar tus propuestas de futuro, de mirar lo que hacen otros para buscar la inspiración. Todo eso son habilidades muy relacionadas con la construcción de futuros y con el análisis de tendencias. Y que nosotros siempre lo contamos. Desde C4E, desde BBK Trends Forum, siempre lo contamos a todos los que se acercan a nosotros y parte del atractivo. Entonces, con estas que trabajan, que eran Livia Fioretti, Lourdes Rodríguez, Els Drag, nos dijeron, oye, trabajamos para... ¿Y quién será Peter Bishop? Entonces empezamos a descubrir, Peter ahora está aquí. Y entonces dijimos, oye, ¿por qué no le invitamos al BBK Trends Forum? Porque nos pareció que todo esto que nosotros veíamos en las tendencias, ellos lo llevaban a los colegios. Dijimos, oye, qué cosa más valiosa. Esto pues ni se nos había ocurrido. Dijimos, ahí va. ¿Por qué no? O sea, qué descubrimiento. Entonces, me acuerdo que lo primero que dijimos, Violeta está aquí, yo dije, va, pero seguro que está ocupadísimo, seguro que no viene. Entonces, ¿cómo vamos a ver? Peter Bishop es como el gran gurú, porque además Peter lleva en lado de las tendencias 50 años. O sea, es con el que todo el mundo habla cuando habla de diseño de futuros, más que tendencias, diseño de futuros. O sea, foresight, o sea, ver que... Es que seguro que no viene, ¿cómo va a venir? Además está en San Francisco, en Sacramento. Al principio creíamos que estaba en Houston, luego descubrimos que estaba en Sacramento. Y luego dijo, vamos a invitarle a ver qué pasa. Entonces también dijimos, seguro que nos cobra un pastón. O sea, estará inaccesible. Será de estos que cobra $30.000 por conferencia, inaccesible. Entonces me acuerdo porque llamé a Peter y dije, oye, llamé al Instituto for the Future, oye, quiero hablar con Peter Bishop, no sé si estará available. Entonces me dijo, you got to me already. Entonces empezamos a hablar. La primera conversación que tuvimos por teléfono fue so friendly, o sea, tan cercano y tan fácil, y bueno, y ahora está aquí. Entonces me parece que tiene un potencial de transformación muy alto y luego el trabajo que ellos están haciendo es mucho más que lo que uno puede pensar de una organización que está en Estados Unidos y que está como ahí alejada. Tienen mucho trabajo en Europa, también ahora se van a Barcelona, en distintos lugares de España, tienen mucho trabajo en Brasil, quizá Brasil sea el país donde más presencia tienen. Nosotros mismos nos hemos aplicado, digamos, no sé, a ver qué tal, para ser voluntarios en esta asociación, porque es una asociación en la que pues, cualquier profesional de las tendencias le atrae participar porque, no sé, extiende tu misión mucho más allá del negocio, ¿no? Y entonces le hemos traído aquí para que nos cuente esto. O sea, Peter va a contar un poco, va a comenzar su sesión explicando un poco mejor su itinerario. Básicamente, él cuenta que se encontró con el diseño de futuros ocasionalmente al principio de su vida. Siempre ha estado en el mundo universitario, pues muy conectado con la industria y luego al final pues conectado con los colegios. Y os sorprenderá su vitalidad y que enamora con la misión que tiene entre manos y luego eso es como contagioso. Y luego es una sesión pensada para que podáis preguntar lo que queráis, o sea, abierta a preguntas. Podéis hacer las preguntas en inglés si queréis, en castellano, y la traducimos nosotros. O sea, yo creo que ahí lo que se trata es que el diálogo fluya como os resulte más cómodo a vosotros. Y Peter, when you want, I mean, I think that I did enough as an introduction, so please, you continue. You have here the presentation for you, okay. And everything is set.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Welcome, everyone. This will have to be in English. I apologize. I have to tell you, when I retired and my wife retired, we were living in Texas, and we thought, well, we should learn Spanish. It would be, something fun to do in retirement, a learning opportunity. So we went to Costa Rica for 4 weeks, 2 different times, to be part of a school there that taught Spanish. We got through 4 weeks. We were un poco, un poquito, and we realized that if we were going to really learn Spanish, we would have to move there and live there for many years, and we didn't want to do that. We had other things to do, so I apologize that my Spanish is not where it should be, but it's wonderful. I did hear Señor Futuristo, thank you very much, and Gran, I don't know, I hope those were good things, and thank you very much. I always like to start with explaining why I use this title, Futures for All, because right now there is, and I'll explain a little bit more, that there is a field about the future. There are a few fields about the future, actually. The primary purpose I'm here is to be at Juan's conference yesterday on trend research, which is about the future. There are other businesses about the future. Economics, of course, is always predicting the future. Competitive intelligence, market intelligence, those are all about the future too. And foresight and future studies, uses both names, is also about the future. And it is a real field. But up till this point, it has been exclusively a professional field. I've taught in graduate school, gave corporate seminars, public speaking, all of those things. And when I retired from the university, I said, nobody's talking to young people. Nobody is sharing our insights, not at a professional level. You don't have to do scenarios. You don't have to do strategic plans. But you have to think about the future in a way that is appropriate for today rather than appropriate for what I'll call the 20th century, the last century. We've changed. I don't know if anybody has noticed that we have internet now, believe it or not, okay? We just had COVID. We got out of a financial crisis. All of those things going along. And the old ways of thinking about the future, though they were better than they were in ancient history, are not so appropriate for today. And so what we want to do, and what I'm glad you joined us here today, was for me to talk about what kind of thinking should go into schools. Because teaching adults is fine. You're all adults. Thank you very much for coming. But you're not going to be here for that long. The young people are going to be here for a lot longer. It's really their future more than ours. And we work with organizations that try and include young voices into the discussion, into policy, into thoughts and discussion about the future. And so if we are going to change the culture, how we think about the future, we have to start early before they pick up with some misimpressions that I'm going to share with you today. So getting to them early, this is the way we think about the future. They come out of school. Well, of course, we always thought about it this way. Well, right now I'm having to teach adults. No, not the way you learned it in school. This is the way we should be doing it. So Futures for All is trying to democratize and include everybody in the discussion of the future as we have it as professional futurists and as foresight professionals. So that's really kind of where the title comes from. But whenever I talk about the future, I like to begin, believe it or not, in the past. Always make a running start. If you're a high jumper, you jump over the bar at the track meet. You don't stand in front of the bar and try and jump right there, right? You back up and you run, and then you jump over the bar. So I'm going to back up a little bit and share a theory, a psychological theory that I heard a long, long time ago. The title of that theory is, You Are What You Were When. You are what you were when. And it's basically an explanation of why generations are different, why young people and old people are different. We're the same culture, same language, a lot of similarities. But I don't know if you have any young people in your life, but you got to admit, they are different. They have some differences. One of the reasons that they're different is that they're young. Okay, see, this takes a professor to know the obvious. This is how they're young, and they're enthusiastic, and they're not experienced, and all of those things. When are they going to grow up? When are they going to do all that stuff? My father never expected me even to have a job, much less to be fairly successful, and so he never expected. They will grow up someday, and they will become more like us than they ever wanted to be. I don't know if you have that feeling. I'm never going to be like my father. I'm never going to. And then all of a sudden, I look in the mirror, and here I am. He's looking at me half from the mirror saying, see, I got you. You ended up being an old man after all, and with all the things that I had all those days. But there are some things that don't change. And that's what I'm talking about, a generational characteristic. Now, I was born a little bit before the baby boom, but I would consider myself kind of an old baby boomer. And that we have a certain view of life. And our view of life is shaped by when we came into the world. Not when we were born, not when we went to school, but when we came out of the family, came out of the bubble of the community. And so it's generally after high school, you go to college, or you go into the service, or you go get a job, and all of a sudden this whole world opens up. And people who are young and just coming into the world don't have a good old days. Now, they would perhaps wish they had moms, cooking and doing the laundry and all that. But in terms of the world, this is the only world that they know. It's the very first world they're seeing. And this was my world when I woke up, when I came out into the world in the late 1960s. Not very different from today. Lots of protest, lots of turmoil, particularly in the United States and elsewhere. Protesting the war in Vietnam, protesting civil rights and discrimination. We were starting the environmental movement, right? First Earth Day was in 1970. We had Arab oil crisis, oil prices, hyperinflation. It was a period of huge turbulence and huge change. I was going to be a physicist. I was probably not going to be a very good physicist, so I got good sense right there and said, no, it's more interesting what's going on out there in the world, the changes that are happening to try and understand that, and I switched, therefore, to sociology. And I was reading books about the future, Alvin Toffler, Future Shock, The Limits to Growth, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. All of these people were saying the world is changing, and I was fascinated by that. So I chose sociology as a place where I would learn about social change. Well, the first big surprise I had in life was that sociologists don't study social change. Wait a minute. The man who created, is attributed to have created sociology in the 1820s, Auguste Comte, the French philosopher, basically created it with two divisions. One was called social statics, and one was called social dynamics. Social statics was how societies and groups were put together, and social dynamics was how they change. Now there's almost no discussion of social change in sociology. Dirty little secret, unfortunately, because they can't get the kind of data. They love the data, they love the correlations and the computers and doing all the mathematics. You can do a survey within a year and publish an article. If you're going to do social change, you've got to gather data over 10 or 20 years. You'll never get tenure. You won't get published. And so they typically don't do that. So I joined it. Nevertheless, I did teach a course that was about as close to future studies, even though I didn't even know it existed at that time, called social problems. Discrimination, poverty, many of the same things we're talking about today are still around in the world, so we were introducing sociology students to those things. But we didn't talk about the future because I didn't think you could talk about the future because we didn't know what was going to happen. This is the gentleman who hired me in my second job at the University of Houston, Clear Lake, Cal Cannon. It's a very dynamic, somewhat temperamental dean of the school of the University of Houston, new branch campus next to the Johnson Space Center. I'll show in a second. I met him at the airport in Atlanta because I was teaching in Georgia at the time. And the deans were traveling around the country interviewing potential new faculty. They were hiring lots of faculty, brand new university. So he said, and I was recommended by one of his current faculty and said, you should talk to Peter Bishop. And I wrote to Atlanta. We met at the airport, had lunch. Very pleasant lunch. He's a brilliant guy. I guess I showed him. I guess I was semi-brilliant also, still very young. And at the very end of the conversation, I had looked through the university catalog, and I said, I found this degree there called Studies of the Future. What's that? And I was probably a little bit edgy, a little bit judgy, a little bit judgmental. And he said, we study the past, don't we? Well, yes, sir. Why can't we study the future? Well, I was a scientist, you know. I knew why you couldn't study the future, because it didn't exist. You know, it's like studying the angels or ghosts or whatever, fairies. You can't study those things. But I didn't say that. I kept quiet, and I got the job. So a good little tactical retreat right there, not getting into an argument with the dean of the school. So I joined the University of Houston, Clear Lake, which is right next to the Johnson Space Center. I was a big space person in the 60s, all the moonshots and all those things going on. And so it was a real thrill to be there. And they had created this degree in 1975, the first year the university was in existence, because Cannon said, we'd study the past, why don't we study the future? So they had a history department, and they had a futures department. And I hung out with the futures faculty because they were the people who were talking about change. They were talking about innovation. They were talking about novelty. The same things that I had been reading about in the late 60s and early 70s, these were the people who were doing that. I was teaching research and statistics, not futures, not even sociology, teaching statistics mostly. But I hung around with them, learned some things from them. And then about 1982 or 3, I decided that I said, I think I could teach this. It was forecasting. I had never had any classes in forecasting. In all of my graduate degree in sociology and all my undergraduate, nobody had ever talked about the future, ever. But I sat in one of the professor's classes, heard what he was doing, said, not only could I teach it, I think I could do it better than he was, but nevertheless. And they said, sure, you teach the course. And oh, by the way, why don't you run the program? In the university, it's kind of upside down. The junior guy has to do the schedule and the budget and talk to he doesn't have any power, can't tell the senior faculty what to do, but I was there to do it. And what I did, first of all, was organize the curriculum, because there were 3 or 4 major faculty members teaching, but they were all teaching something different. The students were not getting a coherent, unified view of future studies. They were getting one particular slice and one particular slice. So I organized the curriculum, and they said, fine, we'll do that. Organized the master schedule. And ultimately, we moved, therefore, to the University of Houston Central Campus, which was the established research university. And the degree there is still doing very well, larger than it ever was. The first degree ever in the world in future studies. So I'm very proud to have been associated with that and retired from that in 2013. And therefore, my career is basically I talk about change a lot. And in some cases, I feel a little guilty. I didn't really experience that much of it because, 30 years in the university and then now 10 years in Teach the Future. But nevertheless, we talk about it all the time. So that's essentially my career. But the reason I bring this up is because I opened my mind to the world. I popped out in the world in 1969, and the world was a mess. Protests and change going on, and that has stuck with me the whole time. Now, I'm older now than I was before. I'm different because of that, but I also have a mindset. So my daughters, who were born in the Gen X generation, the older daughter, and the younger daughter, who was a millennial, they popped out in the world at a different time, and they have different values and different views of what they accept, what they believe, and things like that. That's okay. That's what we're doing, and now we've got Gen Z who's coming on. They're going to grow up here in just a minute, so we're having those kinds of discussions. I have 2 purposes here. That's kind of the run-up. That's the running before we jump over the high bar, and that is to make the case that we should have this subject, not just in graduate schools, not just in corporate seminars, not just at conferences like we had yesterday, but we should have this in school, every school. And to go back to Cal Cannon's question, we teach about the past, yes. Why don't we teach about the future? It's a simple question. And so that's one of the things that I want to talk about. And then, of course, what would we teach? Because most people think of the future as fortune telling, tarot cards, palm reading. When I started teaching the future in the 1980s, We told people, do not put the word futurist in your resume. That was a pure rejection, clearly. Oh, this person's crazy. They're one of those crazy futurists who's just, thinking all these things. Today, the word is a little bit more accepted. Still a little odd. What do you do? How is that? And yet, it is something. Now, our Teach the Future is about putting this into every high school, every middle school, every undergraduate college, not just graduate programs. There are people who say, oh, you should teach it in first grade. Well, I was teaching graduate students for all my life. I don't know what to say to an 8-year-old. But there are people who are good at that. And there are some things about change, about cause and effect, about consequences that they should be teaching. All of those things, even at the youngest ages, as we get into the real subjects in the middle school, the secondary schools, and then I want to share with you a few ideas about what it is we would teach. If you're so smart and you think we should be teaching, what should we teach? We don't just wave our hands and say, oh, future, 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 change, change, change. No, there's an academic subject, and there's an intellectual, I would say, a fairly rigorous process for thinking about change and thinking about the future. And I want to share I have a whole master's degree inside me, so you don't want to wait to hear all of that. But I want to give you just the essence of the kind of things that we should be teaching. All right, in 2 parts. We don't start with the future. We start with change. So what is it about change? Believe it or not, change is something that in our society, we're immersed in it. Social media and the news and innovation, and everybody's talking about it, except in school. School is about the past. Even in history, history doesn't talk so much, in my estimation, about change. It talks about difference. So the 18th century was different. The Renaissance was different. Ancient Rome and ancient Greece, they were different. It wasn't the complete story of change. It wasn't how things became that way and how they went on from there. There's no story involved. There are people, and very interesting people, at interesting times and events, but the sweep of change, it's how you cut, if you have the salami, how you cut the salami. What we tend to do is cut it crossways. Study the present or study a historical period, and we get a slice. What we're going to do is cut it long ways, longitudinally, so that we're talking about the whole story of change. Because believe it or not, we are part of that story. We're a generation. 80 years from now, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren are going to study what we did in this time, in the 2020s, in the 20-teens, and in the 2030s. We're going to have a name like the baby boomers, or we're going to have a name like the Renaissance, or we're going to have the name like the Gilded Age or the Depression. The historians of the future are going to name us and describe to our descendants what it was like to live in this time period. Wouldn't it be nice to get a sense of what they're going to say? Wouldn't it be nice to kind of see ourselves as a chapter in the human history, the story of human history? It doesn't end today. It's not over. This is a chapter. So we're like in a movie or in a play where it's ongoing and ongoing and ongoing. So we're trying to focus just on change. There are 3 things about change that we teach. Again, just the very tippest of the iceberg. The first of those is where change comes from, what I call the sources of change. 2 places. The world creates change. Frankly, we have no influence on that for the most part. We have governments, we have climate change, we have industry, we have militaries, we have all of this stuff going on, and we don't really get a choice much about that. I think it's a lot like sitting down at the card table. If you're a poker player or a bridge player, you get a hand. You say, I don't like this hand, I want another one. No, you got to play the hand that you're dealt. And we are dealt the hand of 2022. We have to play the game as it is set up today, and that's what the world has given us. It's given us this world, where it came from, and where it's heading, and we should be thinking about it as that kind of a thing. Obviously, we have to play the hand. How do you play the hand? You use strategy, and you use intention and goals, and you actually, and then that's the other side. We also, or we're not victims, however. We're not just, the world doesn't tell us what to do. We get to make choices. Now, can I prevent climate change? A little bit, maybe, in my family or in my community, maybe. Am I going to change the IPCC? Am I going to change the United Nations? No. Sorry. I mean, I feel pretty powerful some days, but not that much. And that is what the outbound change is. So these are always in interplay. It's kind of like dancing. You know, the two partners have to play off each other and swing and be all together. So the world is changing, and we're trying to influence the world. The world influences us. We influence the world, and we go on there. But it's within certain limits. We can't change most of the big things of the world. We have to deal with them. But by the same token, we can also make some changes and take action. And I think this is incredibly important because one of the things we found in talking about the future with young people, it's very easy to get them upset. It's very easy to make them anxious. Your world is changing, in some ways not very well. And nobody's really doing anything about it. And they're impressionable. We're their teachers. We're their parents. We're their mentors. So we need to give them also a sense that not only is the world changing, but that you can do something about it. You can't change the big world, but you can change your personal world. And I love it. I would love it if students, young people, would change their school. They're in school more hours of the day during the year than in any other place in the world from the time they're 6 years old till the time they're 22 years old. That is what? 18 years they're in this environment. Change it. Go to the principal. Go to the teacher. Now, the principal and the teacher, frankly, are not going to be happy when they do that. But nor is the oil company going to be happy when we tell them to stop pumping oil, or is the military going to be happy when we say, no, we're not going to give you as much money as we did before because the people don't want you to have all that money. That's okay. That's part of creating change, but it's being part of a dialogue with the world. And so for young people, the world is their school more than any other place. And so outbound change is an extremely important part, the first attribute of change that we teach about. And part of our teaching should not only be to describe what is going to happen or could happen in the future in the world, but what you can do about it. Both of those things simultaneously, always and constantly interacting one with the other. Item number one. Item number two is, where does change take place? We talk about levels of change. The lowest level is what I'll call a very ambiguous word called an enterprise. When you think of an enterprise, you think of a company or a group, a community. Well, a family is in many ways an enterprise, smaller than a company. And an individual even is an enterprise. So they all have change. They all have a future. We could do personal futures. We do personal futures. We have graduates of our program in Houston have written books about and developed tools to help students plan their careers, do all those kinds of things. So the enterprise but the enterprise could be larger than a company, could be a community, could be a province or a nation, or indeed the planet as a whole. So everything from an individual to the planet as a whole is an enterprise. There's change within enterprises. As futurists, we tend not to do that. Those are management consultants. Those are personal coaches. Those are all the people who are helping people and families be better. We're talking about the outside of the enterprise. And there's two outsides, two environments. One is called the transactional environment. We call it that because we're in interaction with that transactional environment almost every day, at least every week. Families go to the grocery store. Breadwinners in the family, mothers and fathers, have jobs. Their neighbors down the street are part of this. There's just this, and again, for me to come and tell them, here's the future of your neighborhood, they're going to laugh at me because I don't know their neighborhood. I don't know their company. I don't know their transactional environment. If they're in the car business or they're in biomedical business or things, they know that way better than I. Now, a lot of these same principles could apply, but I don't know enough about. I can talk about the future of of a school, and I'm going to talk about that later. But car companies, I would be silly to try and give them a sense of what their transactional environment is doing. But there's an environment that is larger than the transactional environment, and that's the global environment. We call it STEEP because that's an acronym for social, technological, economic, environmental, and political. We just break it up into sectors because it's easier to think of it as pieces. In Houston, we took the social, which I thought was a little bit too big, and we divided that into demographics, about populations, sizes, characteristics, the who, the where they live, all of that, and culture. Traditions, values, norms, language, those kinds of things. So, unfortunately, if you do 6 of these characteristics, you can't pronounce it. It's an acronym that you can't pronounce, which means nobody will ever remember it. So we call it the STEEP environment. And it would be nice for students to understand, and I think of it, the term that comes to my mind at this point is situational awareness. Being aware of your time. Being aware of your world. Your world is more than just your friends and your family and your school. The world is what's happening in the community. The world is what's happening in the nation, what's happening in other nations. Becoming aware of that and being able to think about change going on in those things. And that's the second characteristic, is where does change take place? Now, there are lots of subcategories of all of these things, and the subcategories have subcategories, and the subcategories have subcategories. Do I know everything about any one of those things? No. We are generalists. This is one thing that we make a distinction between ourselves and most people in our culture, and that is that they believe that you have to be an expert in something to get respect. You have to be a scientist, or you have to be a business person in one particular field, or you have to be a teacher of language. Well, there are those who are doing that, and so happy that they are. They're doing a good job. I'm not criticizing them at all. But somebody has to stitch it all together. If we want to see the whole picture, if we want to see the whole tapestry, we've got people making the red threads and people making the blue threads and people making the gold threads, but somebody has to weave it together and make one whole picture. A very popular term in school and in life is analysis. I first came across analysis in chemistry class. You're given a test tube of something, it's blue, and you have to analyze it to find out what the pieces, what are the elements in that? And they give us precipitates and all kinds of processes. That's analysis, breaking things apart. I've just done that. I've taken society in general and made 5 or 6 categories out of it. That's analysis. But if we leave it in pieces, we'll never understand ourselves, our time, and our future, because it's not pieces, it's an organic whole. And the opposite of analysis is synthesis. Greek word meaning not taking apart, but putting back together, putting with. And when I teach this in the seminars that I do, people say, oh, I can't possibly know all this stuff. And I say, I agree, you can't. But you can know something about it all. 5 miles wide and 5 inches deep. Now, that doesn't get respect in our society. You're supposed to be the world's expert on some tiny little chemical that does one thing, and maybe it's a drug or something like that, and you spend your whole life, and I'm glad there are people doing that. I'm not saying that they shouldn't. But somebody has to put that piece into all the other pieces of technology and economics and politics to be able to tell the whole story. And in that sense, the STEEP category is where that's our expertise. So I know a little bit. I can talk for 10 or 15 minutes about any one of these things. I teach classes on a kind of a survey of all the things going on in the world. It takes a whole day, and we go through the whole thing. That's putting it back together again, creating a world, both the world of the present and indeed the world of the future. So the second category that I would teach students is the world is made up of all these pieces, and they should know something about. They should know a little bit about politics and a little bit about economics, a little bit about the environment, enough to be able to stitch it together and make a world for themselves. That's not their career. That's not what they're doing. And situational awareness comes out of, pilots have that. You know, airline pilots are told, turn here, increase your altitude, decrease your altitude, and they all do it. But they're still looking out the window. I mean, they don't close the window, they don't close their eyes and just go around. They want to be aware what's going on out there. Soldiers are the same way. Police officers are the same way. What's the crowd doing? Who's in the doorway? What's going to jump out? If they're good, if they're not good, they get hurt. So if they're good, they tend to be aware of their situation, and they're trained to do that. Well, we should do that as a world as a whole, and we should have young people doing that in school, talking about all of these things in some way or the other. So that's the second characteristic, the environments that we live in. The third characteristic is how fast change occurs. And these are not two types. These are the ends of a continuum. Continuous change over long periods of time creates amazing changes. The world's population has been growing for 200,000 years, okay? Little bit at a time, little bit at a time. We've just had an explosion, but it is still long-term continuous change. The plates on the surface of the earth are moving around and creating things like the Rocky Mountains and earthquakes in California. And that's very slow-moving change, and that's continuous. But every once in a while, you get a disruption. Every once in a while, an event comes along, be it COVID, be it the iPhone, be it World War II, be it a revolution, and it changes the whole thing. And so we should be thinking of both of these things simultaneously. Isaac Newton, I've told you I was a physicist, so I tend to use physics examples. A body at rest or in motion will remain at rest or in motion until acted upon by a force. The continuous is the motion, and the force is the disruption. That's true in physics. It's also true in social change as well. And so we think about physics, the shapes of change, and people are very comfortable with this. You can get data, you can put it in a spreadsheet, you can extrapolate the data. Oh, I know, I can predict the future because I can I do a regression and it's very simple. We all learn to do that, and that's good. And that's not a problem. The growth of computers, the growth of climate change, all that's just going to continue on, and we think that we know the future once we stop there. Until, of course, a disruption comes along. This is a list. You have your own list of disruptions in the last 40 or 50 years. Every one of them changed the world to some extent. Every one of them changed an industry that our parents were in. My father was a salesman in the oil industry. The oil industry is nothing like it was when he first started in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Telecommunications is different. Medicine is different. Well, I would say schools are different, but they're not much. Nevertheless, offices are different, business is different, research is different, because I think there is a morning, I think it happens in the morning, when a person in these industries kind of wakes up and says, uh-oh, this is not what I signed up for. I don't know how to be this person. I don't know how to be a marketing person in the internet era. I don't know how to be a business person when I have to use social media. This is brand new to me. And we're one of the first generations that had to experience this. My grandfather was an accountant in a bank in New York City. He was first a journalist, he moved to New York, and he was a banker and just an accountant, just doing paper stuff for 30 years. That was very common. You started something, and before that, you were a farmer. You were always a farmer. You were a mechanic. You were always a mechanic. And now we're hopping around from this, and we're having to change this, and we're involved in this turbulent period. And so it's the disruptions that have increased. There's always been continuous change. Sometimes it was so slow we didn't even recognize it, but there's always been continuous change. And it changes our life, not just our industry. Families are different today. Entertainment is different. Food is different. Transportation is different. You go through that list and you can say how this is different, and just in the last 20 years, even more so in the last 50 years, and even more in the last 100 years. So we should be preparing students for a world in which their past can be some help, but it's not the way it used to be. You couldn't say, well, just be like Grandpa and you'll be fine. No, you won't. You have to learn to be adaptive, resilient, because disruptions will come and take continuous change, and boom, we'll change it. Boom, and keep changing. What happens when those disruptions occur? If you extrapolate the continuous changes, you stay into something we call an era. An era is a period of time that kind of describes the present. Okay, the Depression was an era, the Cold War was an era, the Renaissance was an era, we have all of those. We're in an era today. I don't know what the future historians will call our era. We have obviously candidates around. Are we the internet era? Are we the climate change era? Or whatever? I don't know. But if you're doing continuous change, there's no disruption. It just is a curve that goes forward. But when that disruption occurs, then we start a process, which is called an S-curve. Some people say, oh, it's a learning curve. You know, at the learning curve, you know where you start? Stupid. You start at the bottom, and you have to work your way up to the top. And we do this as a society. So somebody invents the internet, and now we're trying to figure out how to live, make money, raise our children in the era of the internet, and we're in this transition period, which is messy. It's confusing. The old rules don't seem to work as well as they used to, and the new rules haven't been invented yet. We don't know where we're headed, and so we're in this confusing state. Some things change all at once. Nothing changes everything, but we're in this transition period, and we're having that period because of the disruptions. We're having that period much more so than any other generation has ever had in the history. But sooner or later, I believe, we reach a plateau. We reach the new era. Whew. Okay, that was interesting. That was kind of exciting, but I'm glad that's over. Most of us think that. Who's defending the old era? The status quo. The managers, the people who are benefiting from the old era, they don't want that old era to go away. So they don't want those disruptions. Who is benefiting? Oh, the visionaries. People who write books and give speeches, futurists. Oh, they're talking about this glorious or this awful future coming ahead, and they're talking about it all the time. Is there anybody who benefits during the transition? Yes. Entrepreneurs. What are they doing? They're seeing the fact that the world is changing and opening up little opportunities, and they zoom in there to get that opportunity. They're happy with change. You know, let the old era go away because now I can do something that I was not able to do 10 years ago or 20 years ago. New opportunities, new businesses, new educational systems, et cetera, et cetera. They're happy, but they're a minority. Most people don't like the transition period. They're happy when it's over and we're into the new era. So the whole process of change then, and this will be the last slide in this thing, is I borrow a term from biological evolution. Charles Darwin, the inventor of descent by natural selection, et cetera, made one big mistake. He thought species grew and changed gradually over time. He didn't have this word, but he would have called it continuous. Every generation had a slight different and ultimately became much different than the other species. Well, he didn't have fossils. He didn't have the fossils that we have. We went down into the ocean, dug up the fossils, and we found out, oh, it wasn't that way at all. There were periods. There were eras. There was the Cretaceous era, the Jurassic era, the Permian, all of those things. And it was long periods of equilibrium, more or less static species, and then all of a sudden we invented vertebrates, or we invented animals, or we invented something that changed the whole type of what the fossils were. So punctuated equilibrium is essentially the succession of equilibrium periods and transition periods. The equilibrium periods are the eras. We're in an era today. Some things are fairly stable, and some things are changing. This is not universal. And the transition periods are from one to the other. Thinking about change that way gives us a sense, again, we're part of this play. We're part of this film. We're part of this book that has chapters. The chapters are the eras, and changing from one chapter to the other are the transitions. Thinking about that gives us a situational awareness. We're not just in the world today, kind of blind to what's going on. We're part of a long-handing story, which is not going to end with us. Let's hope. And that there will be other chapters, and there will be new eras. And let's talk about who those might be and what those might be. So the purpose of this first section, just talking about change, is to emphasize the fact that we should include this in school. If this is good enough for us as adults in corporate seminars, which I teach all the time, we should also be teaching this in high school. We should also be teaching this in undergraduate colleges to every student, futures for all. And a lot more than this I have, and we don't have all day for me to share everything that we would do, but this would be part of the curriculum. So let me ask you, is this something that you think young people would benefit from? Would you have benefited? I've had many times when we talk to particularly college students, Why weren't they teaching this before? Well, I go back to Cal Canon. We teach about the past, don't we? Why can't we teach about the future? Well, we should be teaching about the future. Is this something that you think we should make room for it in the high school curriculum, in middle school curriculum, in the college curriculum? And I really do want an answer. If it's no, great. If it's yes, kind of, great. If it's yes, really, definitely. Questions? Let me pause for a moment and see if Juan, you want to tell people they can talk Spanish if they want to, or how we do this? Everybody's so quiet. Okay, yes, sir.
I will do good morning.
Hey, good morning to you.
Morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
I will do the question in Spanish, okay?
Please.
If you don't mind.
Juan will tell you.
So,
Okay.
translation.
Yes.
Bueno, yo te quería preguntar sobre... creo que estamos todos de acuerdo en la importancia de explicar el futuro, ¿verdad? Pero ¿cómo hacemos para que todos los agentes que intervienen en el proceso educativo de un niño lo entiendan y lo entiendan de una manera similar, para que no se vean amenazas, para que no se vean resistencias, para que cada uno no tire para su lado? Es decir, ¿cómo podemos consensuar que esto es fundamental?
What he's saying is that we agree that teaching about the future in the schools,
Yes.
I mean, it's positive, so it's a good thing.
Good. Thank you.
But the thing is how to do it, working with all the different agents that take part in the educational process.
Yep.
And how to do to all agree, to all of us,
Yes.
all of the different parts being on the same page, because that's the difficult thing to
Yes,
do.
it is.
Because there are so many people taking a role in this.
Yep. Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It is a big problem. I have to tell you, I've told Juan and my friends here, my wife's comment on this mission that I have taken on after I retired. She had 40-plus years in education, brilliant teacher, administrator, principal, associate superintendent, all of that kind of thing. She says, I think this is wonderful. I think it's great what you're doing. And, of course, you know you're going to fail. Well, thank you very much. I like you, too. She says, no, education is too hard. I've had professional futurists tell me, don't bother with education. Talk to business people. Talk to even government people. Educators are so stuck in the past that there is no way to change them. And silly though I am, I mean, in your own tradition, Don Quixote, right? So I'm Don Quixote saying here, this is maybe impossible, but I'm trying to do it anyway. And let me tell you how it's going to take place. Education is what we call a trailing institution. It doesn't create change. It follows change. So education does include new subjects. We now have a lot of subjects in school today that were not in school when I was in school. I mean, believe it or not, I went to one of the best high schools in the country, in the U.S., and we didn't even have a class in biology. I mean, this is really old time. Computer science, coding, all of that stuff is brand new. Why did education pick that up? Because the world said, do it. I call it a demand signal. It's very much common in business, the demand signal. The public wants this product. Well, gee, we can make some money doing it. What they have not gotten yet is a demand signal to the schools, and they don't want to hear it. They don't want to change. Most people don't want to change, and I admit that. But if the demand signal gets high enough and loud enough, not only do they have to change because they're responsible to the public just like the government is, but they also can make money doing it. It's a business. They can get the students to come, pay tuition or go to special classes or things like that. And where does the demand signal come from? Two places. Businesses. We're hiring people who know a lot about the past, but they know nothing about the future. We're in the business of creating a future, and they know nothing about that. You need to start educating them about change and about the future. We're having to do that ourselves. Why don't you do that? We're paying taxes. And then finally, parents. Parents who become dissatisfied with the fact that everything their children are learning is from the past, which is not worthless by any means. I'm very interested in history. I know a lot about history because I'm about change. How did it come from? Where's it going? All of that kind of stuff. But if I had to say where my grandchildren are going to go to school, wait a minute, you also need to be talking to them about preparing for different change. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. So the stakeholders in education is a rigid, very well protected organization, institution. It's because most people believe that the purpose is to transmit the knowledge and the wisdom sometimes and the information from the past, whether it's history or science or math or social studies or geography. Go through all the subjects. It's all from the past. And we do need to do that. Like Cannon said, we teach about the past, don't we? Yes. Why don't we then also talk about changes that could be in the future, and now we know how to do that. If I were making this speech 50 years ago, you say, how would you do that? And I would not have organized the curriculum at the University of Houston and be able to say, look, I did this for graduate students. I could do this for high school students at the appropriate level.
So, Peter, do you have any success story from the school, not from the graduate or the university teaching, but for the school teaching?
Very few. I have trained a group. This was very interesting. There is a school in Istanbul, came to us and said, we want to put futures into the curriculum. And we did an online training program with their teachers. They taught a book that we have, which is a workbook for doing scenarios called the Futures Thinking Playbook. And they taught that over a semester, the spring semester. And they did a survey at the end of the semester. Two things, they surveyed the students and the teachers. And they said, what did you think? Did you like this? Was it valuable? Et cetera, et cetera. Students loved it. This is great. We should be doing all the time. We should be doing this all the time. Students loved it. Teachers didn't. Why? Because they didn't know how to teach it. When you teach something in which, and I'll get to that maybe if we do, we'll just have a conversation, I'll bring it in anyway. When you're teaching facts, when you're teaching information in lecture and textbooks, that's one way of teaching, and I'm doing a lot of that here. If you're teaching skills, if you're teaching critical thinking and communication and even math in some cases, that's a completely different approach. You can't learn a skill out of a textbook. You can't learn a skill out of a PowerPoint lecture. A little bit of instruction, and now let's go do it. And you try it, you get some feedback, you get better, get feedback. And where are we teaching skills in school? We are. On the football pitch, in the theater program, in the music program, in student council, in the clubs and the hobbies that students are in, all outside the classroom. That's where they're learning skills, if they're learning them at all. In the classrooms, it's all about information. And so if the demand signal was, you're graduating students who are really smart, and they know a lot, but they don't know how to do much. And I hear that from business people all the time. They have a lot of facts in their head, but they don't know what to do with those facts. And I'm talking about a huge paradigm shift in education, way beyond teaching just the future. We're talking about the fact that the information that we have in our hand today in that iPhone is a lot of what is in the students are learning in their textbooks. Why don't we just have them look it up when they need it? Why are we making that the primary purpose? You got to have information. If you're going to think critically about the world, you got to know what's going on. That's information. But every piece of information should be linked to a use, not just to a test. What are you going to do with that? What difference does that make to you? Which of these facts which of these perspectives do you believe is more appropriate or more true or better for you or more useful? And exercising their judgment rather than just their ability to remember what was in the textbook and give it back. So that's a change within education that I'm not going to see. You may see more of it. I hope you do. And I hope my little grandchildren will see it a lot as we shift away from, because in the past, what you carried around in your head was a secret to success. You couldn't go to the library every time you needed to find something or look something up. It was really difficult. I remember, I was in school then. You had to put as much into your head as possible. Well, I don't know if you have any young people in your life, but they pick up that phone and they know the answer to the question in 20 seconds. I learned that in school 5 years ago. I just look it up when I need it. If that mindset were to be introduced by parents, by businesses, by employers in the world, that would change the whole fundamental. Now, do teachers know how to teach that way? Unfortunately not. What they're learning in school is how to teach the old way, how to teach the 20th century way, which is fine, and they're doing a good job. I mean, my whole family is teachers, and I have the greatest love for that profession. But they're behind the times. They're forgetting that students, young people today, are linked to this library of the present and even of the future that has it's like Amazon has all the books. It's not like Barnes & Noble or some bookstore that has some of the books, the ones they think they can sell. Amazon has all the books. So you can have any book you want. By the same token, the internet has all the information. It's not just in Wikipedia, it's in Google, it's in Apple, it's in videos and whatever. There's a difference in terms that I use, education, which is just in case. Just in case you're going to have to know the answer to a question, we've learned it. Just in case you run into a chemical formula, you're going to know how to understand it. When's the last time you ran into a chemical formula in your life? If you're a chemist, you're seeing them all day long. But if you're a business person, not so much. A teacher or a parent, never, right? Just in case you run into a trinomial equation, you know how to factor it into its pieces. I learned that once. I taught that. Actually, I taught algebra in high school one year. But those students don't remember that, nor do they ever need it, nor do they ever use it. If they ever had to do that, they could probably find that on the internet within a minute or two. So rather than just in case, kind of like just in case of packing up our backpack in everything we need for our journey into the future, which we jam all this stuff in there, what about just in time? What about having a backpack that instantaneously produces what you need for your journey? Well, that's called the iPhone. That internet device gives you facts, a lot of the stuff the students. Now, you have to have facts. There's nothing wrong with information. It's absolutely necessary, but it's the use of information. I asked a history I was talking to a history faculty in the United States in a community college, and I said, okay, you're teaching them about history. You're teaching them history. Good people, doing a good job. I said, do you ever teach them what to do with that information? No. Really? Why learn it if you can't use it? Do you know, if you thought about it, would you know what to tell them? They wouldn't. They've never been part of that. What's good of knowing the history of your company or the history of your country or the history of the world? Now, it's nice to know. It's interesting. We should appreciate the fact that we're not the only generation that's lived on this planet. Of course, we should know that and use that. But is there something that a skill associated with the knowledge? So I'm making the distinction between knowledge and information and skills and uses. So all of those things should be going on simultaneously. So if a coach is helping players learn to play football, and they're trying to teach them how to dribble and how your feet should go and all that stuff, there's instruction there. That's information. And then there's practice. There's the use of it. We should be not only teaching the knowledge, we should also be teaching the skills and the practice. So a long answer to a very, very good question. And the demand signal is my answer, is the short answer. The society has to stand up and say, you're doing a good job teaching information. we need you also to teach. You're doing a good job teaching about the past and information from the past. We also need you to teach how to be in the future, in a different future, in a future you can't predict, how to be resilient, how to be adaptable, how to be innovative. They're not doing that yet. Some are, very few. Okay, other questions, comments? I promise I won't answer so long the next time. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, should I go on? Okay, all right. So, the future. All of this is really just about change. It hasn't even been to the future yet. So, where did we learn about, we know about the future. You have an idea about the future. We all have ideas about the future. And we did learn about it in school. We didn't have a class in it. Nobody ever told us. I don't think the word future hardly ever came up in all the education that America can offer, and it hardly ever came up in my education. But we learned about it in other places, and more by implication than by instruction. And the first place we learned about the future was in science class. We learned that you could predict the future in physics, in chemistry. So we came up with this idea of the metaphor of the future as a road that goes off into the forest and has a destination. And therefore, when people discuss the future, they're trying to figure out, how does that road end? Where does it end? And I have to be, and the first thing that they ask me is, how accurate are you going to be? And you'll see in a second, I don't answer that question because accuracy is not the purpose. But they think of it as a road or a river. It's a journey someplace, and we get after it. Because that's what we learn in science class. You could predict the future. If you predicted the future, you got a good grade and you graduated, and you were successful. Therefore, they thought that would be true in society as well as in physics, and obviously it's not. We also learned about the future in history class, because history was one thing after the other. An event, condition, an event, condition, it more or less followed almost inevitably. A leads to B, and B leads to C, and D, and E, and F, and all the way through the whole history. We never really thought, what if? What if this thing had not happened this way? What if this event had not occurred? What if John Kennedy was not assassinated? What if? There's a very famous historian in the U.S., does a lot of podcasts, and she said, the job of the professional historian, she said, of course, it wasn't of course to most people, but of course, is to rescue the uncertainties of the past. The people who were actors in those days, in the historical periods, we know more about their lives than they did. You'd think, oh, well, they knew their life very well. They were in the world then. We don't know all their details. But we know the end of their story. We know how it turned out. They don't know that. They were just as confused and just as uncertain about their future as we are about ours. We forget that. We always think of it's we knew how they started, how they did, and what happened. They only knew how they started and what they were doing. Same way. And we should think of history as that period of uncertainty. People didn't know. They made decisions. Maybe they were right decisions, maybe they were wrong. We should talk about the alternative decisions they could have made, different things that could have happened, and that would have created much different futures. So we thought the future was predictable, and we thought the future was more or less inevitable, determined to be a certain particular way. Then we go to college, and we find a sociologist or an anthropologist who messes up our mind and finds out that no, in society, it's not quite like physics. Because one teacher will tell you, well, it's all the marketplace, and another teacher will tell you, well, it's all the government, and another people will tell you it's all free will, and another teacher will tell you, well, it's all, determined by the powers that be, and Karl Marx would say you're determined to be the proletariat, blah, all that kind of stuff. A huge number of theories, all confusing at the same time. And frankly, I don't know if it's true here, but in the United States, this is what parents are up against. This is what they hate about school, confusing their children, giving them alternative theories about how this is and how this. So now we're getting to be confused. And if any of those children turn out to be teachers, They're not going to share that confusion with their students because a teacher is supposed to know what they're going to teach. That's their job. I got to teach you what I know. I got to teach you the truth. But if there isn't any truth, then I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that. And then we take statistics class and we find out some things are really random. I mean, there is no explanation for why number 6 comes up when you roll the dice. It just is. That's just a random effect. And so we have predictable futures, determined futures, alternative futures, and random futures. And then we finish the confusion with the chosen future. Because what are we being told as young people, by teachers, by parents? You can be anything you want to be. All you have to do is work at it. Well, that's not true. You can't. But you can get more of something if you do work at it than if you don't. If you just sit back and let the world take you along, you'll be like a cork floating on the river, and it will go someplace. If you're an actor, if you're swimming, you can swim to one side, you can swim to the other, you can take action. Now, the river's still going to take you along because it's a big river and it's very strong, but you can float to one versus the other. So now we're really confused, and that's why we don't teach this in school. Teachers do not like to share confusion with their students. They want to teach them things that they can know, they can test, they can use, like chemistry and physics and the laws of society. But when they're confused, now, so can we dispel the confusion when we teach futures to high schools, to college undergraduates? Yes, because we narrow it down to 3 mechanisms. 3 ways in which the future becomes the present. One is already talked about, momentum. Things going on for a while are going to continue to go on. Climate change is going to continue. I hope it changes someday, but it's not going to be this year or next year. And it's going to be for a while. A force, a body at rest or in motion, will continue until it is acted upon by a force. And the disruption is the force. We don't know when those disruptions will occur, but they occur all the time. In fact, they're occurring more frequently than ever. Have we stopped disruptions? No. We always talk about continuous change and predicting the future. We don't talk about when the next revolution is going to come, when the next invention is going to come, when the next earthquake is going to come, because we don't know. And if we can't predict it, then we just are silent about it. We forget the future is made up of not only continuous change, but also disruptive change. And finally, and of course, we also have some choice. We can't determine what hand we're going to get at the card table, but we can determine how we're going to play it. We're going to bluff this time. We're going to take a risk, or we're going to play it safe. Those are our choices, and we determine the future too. So all of these 3 things are operating simultaneously. Momentum goes on continuously. Disruptions happen frequently. Choices are made, and they tend to update the future. And as a result, we get 3 different kinds of futures that we teach about. The first of those is the expected future. What if no disruption occurs? And that'll happen. What if we do not solve climate change? Well, we'll be boiling. We'll boil the oceans. Not boil them exactly, but it will be a much different planet than before. Momentum continues until it's acted upon by a force. The expected future is a warmer climate and all the consequences thereof. Then there are potential disruptions, plausible disruptions, and those create alternative futures. It's just like in history. What if the Archduke had not been assassinated in Serbia in 18 or 17? And might have had World War I anyway, but not the way it happened in history. And all those contingencies could have happened. We don't learn about that, but they could be in the future. So we have, for inbound change, we have 2 kinds of futures. Where we're headed, and that's just straight logical extrapolation, and what could happen instead. And we should be teaching students the skill of doing both of those things, not just extrapolating trends, but also thinking about potential disruptions. And then finally, the third is the preferable future. Of all of those alternative futures, which one do we want? What are our values? Do we want to be economically prosperous? Do we want to be gentle on the planet? Do we want to be socially caring? Do we want to care for the less advantaged? Those are our values, and we get to have our values. We don't always get to implement them the way we want, but we get to have them and establish a preparable future. So that's the direction of the outbound. This is where we're headed. This is where we want to go. And we're going to use our time, our talent, our energy to move ourselves, our families, our communities, our world in that direction. So all of these three futures, to me, that's not confusing anymore. It's complicated, but it's not, is it determined or is it predictable? It is predictable. The expected is predictable, but the disruptions are not. Are we in control? Not control, but we do have influence. And that's what I would share with young people, is that these three futures pretty well describe, and you should be thinking about all of them all the time. This is a picture of that. We call it the cone of plausibility. We start off at the present, at a point, and as time goes on, the number of alternatives grows. It's not just a line, the expected future. It's also an expanding cone. If we go out 50 years, we'll get a lot more different futures, probably, can't say for sure, probably than if we go out 20 years. And if we go out 20 years, we'll get more futures than 5 years and more futures than 1 year. So it's an expanding cone of alternative futures, part of which we prefer, which is our visionary future, part of which we hate, which is the future we're trying to stay away from. We're trying to get away from those. That's the picture of these three kinds of futures all simultaneously there. And there's three different mindsets, three different thought processes that go into these. The expected future is exactly what people are learning today. It's definite, it's scientific, it's logical extrapolation, it's spreadsheets, it's continuous change, it's linear regression, you name it, whatever, econometric models, climate models, all of that stuff is part of the expected future. But we should also be asking, what if? And there, logic is not so important. It can't be just, aliens landing on the park downtown. No, that could happen, I guess, but it's not plausible. What are the plausible alternatives out there? And coming up and students telling stories to each other and to themselves about plausible alternatives. What could happen instead? And what am I going to do? And am I going to be prepared? Not that I'm going to prepare for every eventuality, but as you'll see, I will have a mindset where I think those things are plausible. That's using imagination, even speculation. Oh gosh, in school, we're allowed to be speculative? Not only allowed, we're required to be. I always think, and particularly at the university, which is so based on research and so based on the first of these mindsets, that even in schools where they're teaching people a profession, business, engineering, medicine, the people whom we revere as the inventors and the leaders of the past used as much imagination, I claim, as logic. Steve Jobs could envision a beautiful phone, a beautiful device, and he did that not just by doing a spreadsheet, but by allowing himself to use his imagination. And designers are doing that all the time. We should have some of that thinking in every school, not just the design school, not just the art department, or not just the drafting class. But what about my life? Am I allowed to be imaginative? Am I required to be speculative? What if? And how could this be? And all of those things. And then the third line is a completely different mindset. It's not logic. It's not imagination. It's values. Committing to a set of values, committing to a preferred future, and not waiting until I'm retired and 65 years old to look back on my life and say, oh, that's what my life was about. Wouldn't it be nice to know that during the life rather than waiting for it at the end as a reflection? Wouldn't that be nice as a decision? I am going to, now I got to make a living, I got to raise my kids, got to do the job, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying this is a full-time thing. But is there a thread in my whole life that has to do with values? Am I trying to make the world better somehow, and how? And when I go to work, am I doing it for that purpose? Or is it may just to make money to put bread on the table? Okay, that's your situation, then that's your situation. But most of us are not quite that constrained. We have some discretion. What kind of a job? How do I do that job? What kind of friends do I have? What kind of causes do I ally myself with? That is now a completely different mindset. Are any one of these better than the other two? No. Are they all three necessary for living a successful and a resilient future, a prosperous future? Absolutely yes. And we should be teaching all three of these. So the end result, there's two things to take away. These four things are kind of guidelines. Expect the expected. Expect we're going forward and momentum will continue. And the unexpected. Now, notice that it's not instead of or. It's expect both of them at the same time. Here's where we're headed, and at the same time, we may get sidetracked by some kind of a disruption. Obviously, COVID is the perfect teaching example of all of this. I claim that people who have learned this, and particularly foresight professionals and futurists, were as surprised. I was as surprised that it was that serious as it was. At the same time, it wasn't, I'm paralyzed with fear, oh my gosh, change and blah, 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 blah. No. Oh, okay, here's a change. I've been in change before. I know about change. I go about my business and do what I can do. It's not when the unexpected happens, we're not paralyzed and we're not in fear of it. I love this idea. Look to be surprised. Now let me put a warning on this. Don't tell your coworkers that you're surprised. That's not a good thing to do. You're not supposed to be surprised. You're supposed to know everything. You're supposed to be, oh yeah, I knew that all along. That's all right. But inside, you should be saying, I didn't know that. Oh, I was wrong. I have something here to learn. And the image that I use is the image of the vaccine, which we know a lot more about than when I created this chart many years ago. Vaccines give us a little bit of the disease in order to protect us from the big one when it finally comes. It gets our immune system. So if we are listening to surprises all the time, looking to be wrong, looking for surprises, when the big surprise comes along, we're not as surprised. We've ramped up to the fact that the world is changing and this change could happen. So putting that into your behavioral repertoire, again, we're not teaching that in school. You're supposed to know everything, pass the test, and you're done, and everything is fine. Signals, this is where trend research comes in. Signals, the future is advertising itself. All the futures are advertising themselves. The strong signals are the trends. Demographics, economics, climate, all of those things are going on. Then there are weak signals. And weak signals, once in a while, most of them they're not changing the future. They could. They're not changing the future, but they could change the future. And people will say, well, which one should I pay attention to? Well, that's not the right question. You should pay attention to them all in a little way so that you're aware that out there on the margins, the future is being created. The future is being introduced to the world. One of those is going to come zooming in, like from Wuhan, China, and all of a sudden disrupt the whole world. That was a weak signal in December of 2019, and it finally changed us in March of 2020, but some people were paying attention to that then. And that's what weak signal is. I love this picture of a weak signal. See this? This is a park in northern Minnesota, Minnesota state in the U.S., in the center part of the state. Kids are playing in this little water creek. It's a beautiful sunny day. Doesn't happen in Minnesota all the time because it's usually really cold and all that. That little creek is actually the Mississippi River, the beginning of the Mississippi River. All the important things we're dealing with today started out as little teeny creeks. We can't know which ones are going to be, but we pay attention to them. We look for them. And I would say, if it work, if you have a culture that says, did you read this thing? Or did you hear about this? Or I saw this news report, stupid little things. If a lot of times the work people will tell you, don't bring all that stuff in here. We don't have time for that. We have a job to do. We've got big things to do. No, we should be talking about this once in a while. What may be happening out there? What innovations could become important in our life in 5-10 years? Not always which ones we expect to happen. And finally, assumptions. An assumption is a belief. It's not a fact. It's a belief about how things are. We make assumptions about people are generally good or they're not. We make assumptions about government, it's good or it's not. We make assumptions about technologies, and all of those kinds of things. There are beliefs about how the world works. And those assumptions they don't determine, but they guide our behavior. And there were 2 times in 2005 in the United States where assumptions got us into trouble. Hurricane Katrina came into the Gulf of Mexico and went right up the Mississippi River over the top of New Orleans, a Category 3 or 4 hurricane. New Orleans is below sea level. It's not like the Netherlands. It is below sea level. And when it rains, it doesn't run off. It's like a bowl. It fills up. And they made an assumption about New Orleans in a hurricane that the levees, which hold back the sea, hold back the lake, they will hold, and they didn't. The water rushed in, and disaster ensued. That was an assumption that they made at Louisiana State University when they planned the evacuation of New Orleans, that the roads would always be clear. Well, the roads filled up with water. And then people were stranded and all the terrible things. 3 weeks later, a hurricane came into the Gulf of Mexico, and on Thursday, expected to land on Saturday morning, it pointed directly at the Houston area. Texas A&M University had done a plan for the evacuation of the low-lying areas of Texas, 3 feet above sea level. Houston is 50 feet above sea level. It's not a bowl. Water floods, but it runs off eventually. In that case, however, they thought that maybe some tens of thousands of people would leave Houston just because they were scared, just because they didn't want to be in that big rainstorm or whatever. What turned out created this traffic jam was 1.2 million people chose to leave Houston on that Thursday. They were in this traffic jam for 24 hours, ran out of gas, ran out of water, food. They couldn't get out. They couldn't get emergency vehicles to them because it was literally a traffic jam between Houston and Dallas and Houston and San Antonio, and it was a disaster. In that case, the assumptions got us into trouble. So the rule at the bottom is try to be as certain as you can, but remember that there are alternative assumptions which might turn out to be true as well. So the 2 big takeaways here. The future is not one. It is not the future. It is really the futures. And people tell me I should say that. I think of the future as a set of futures. It's kind of a strange word, the futures. I hope we get to use it more. It's not one, it's many. It's not the end of a road. It's like a river delta, which branches off. It's like a tree where you have different branches going up. And if an ant's crawling up the tree, it can go on all kinds of different branches. It's not just like a road going up like that. Thinking about the future as a set of alternatives and preferreds is how we think about the future, not just the expected, not just the way the momentum is taking us. And finally, we're not preparing for specific alternatives. We're conditioning ourselves. We're getting ready to be part of a future that we can't predict. Just the way people exercise. Jogging, I tell people, is not transportation. I mean, you get in a car to go someplace and be there at work or the stadium or whatever. You don't jog to work. Some people might, but it's very rare. But you jog to condition your bodies. Scenarios are about conditioning our minds, getting ready. And these are astronauts, these are airline pilots, these are military commanders that are thinking about what could happen instead. Now, the airline pilot has to learn how to fly the plane. That's the expected future. They have to learn how to navigate to the destination. That's the expected future. But they also have to prepare when an engine goes out, when a signal light comes on, when the landing gear doesn't go down, all of those kind of unexpected futures, and they train for those things too. And my point is that even if something happens that they never trained for, they're in better shape. They're conditioned to say, okay, here's a change. We got to do something. We've been through drills before about things that their trainers told us. Now we have the opportunity to practice and do something that we've never practiced, but will be good, will be better than if we thought it was all going to be the expected future. So we're conditioning ourselves to live in a turbulent world and live into an alternative future. So this is another place where I give you the opportunity to say yay, nay, or somewhere in between. See, no. Should we be teaching this to our students? Should we be teaching this to our children? Should parents and businesses and governments hire people who already know this, and they're resilient, and they're imaginative, they're not just logical, they're imaginative, and they're value-based, intentionally so. And we should prepare them for that in school, my claim. Comments, questions? Where did Juan go? He's going to be my interpreter here. Oh, you're the, okay, Paula, my colleague, Paula. Any questions in English, Spanish, Ukrainian? I don't think we have any Ukrainians here, sorry. I think that's not on the table. Oh, have I stunned you all into silence, huh? All right. Well, let me finish up and let's talk about education. Because education is what we're really talking about here. And this, I am going to ask, this is the audience participation part. You're going to answer these questions. What are students learning here? Who would like to say it? English, Spanish, whichever. Basque, I guess. I hope there's somebody here who can talk in Basque. What are they learning in general? Not the subject, but what are they learning? Some kind of information? Yeah, okay. How else, that's a good answer. What else would you say? How to take a test, they're learning that, yes. So this is school, right? What are they learning here? Skills, teamwork, hard work, commitment, leadership, values. Why do we separate these things? Why does all this has to go on outside the school building? Maybe student council is inside, but most of this happens outside the school building. Why don't we have history classes where students are doing some of this stuff, playing games, acting out plays, using the information that they've learned in history to dramatize and have debates about, so you're the founding of a country, and you have different people who want the country to be Marxist or another who want it to be democratic, and you have a debate among them. That's a skill. We're using our information to good effect. We're practicing skills. So that's one of the huge distinctions when we talk about education. I can't predict, and I don't expect anytime soon, that inside school is going to be like outside school. I wish it were. I wish I could wave a magic wand and all of a sudden start teaching skills. That's not going to happen anytime soon, but it should. It's my preferred future. Even thinking of it as an alternative, I don't know. We'll go on. Okay, here's another question. Where do students get most of the information that they do use? On the left, where are they getting the information? On the left. From where? Okay, right at a lecture, right? In school, in a class. Where are they getting it on the right? I've been over this already, right? If you have young people, I mean, I'm just amazed. I mean, when my daughter and her husband, when we first started being with them, we travel with them, whatever. As soon as a question comes up, they've got the phone in their hand, usually already. They don't have to pick it up, and they 20 seconds later. I have one of the best, and I have terms here, and the terms are just in case versus just in time. The best story that I have was my son-in-law. This is my daughter's first child, born in a hospital, early in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we saw her in the hospital room with her husband and the new baby right that first day. I had to go on a trip. And my wife will go on for a long time about how I always have the wrong time to go on trips. But nevertheless, went on a trip, and I got a picture, and I wish I could have produced that picture here, because it was my son-in-law bending over. It was like this. He was bending over a seat in the hospital room. I couldn't see what he was doing, but he had his iPhone propped up on the windowsill, and he was watching YouTube learning how to swaddle a baby. just in time. Right? That baby need to have swaddle clothes on. And he didn't learn that in school, and he didn't learn, he knew where to go to get that. And are we not doing that all the time? And now I got to change the gasket in my refrigerator. I got to change a tire. I got to cook the meal. I got to learn this thing. We're learning out of that form of education just in time, rather than just in case I run into a calculus integral and I know how to differentiate it. I taught all that. Yeah, please, Matthias.
Yeah, but I guess this also takes a lot more critical thinking skills, because before they got the information directly from someone they
Yep.
trusted, right? Now
Yes.
they get all the information and they have to select what kind of resources they can trust themselves. So what's your perspective on that?
Yes, okay, and that's a skill. Right now, when you're in the classroom, you accept everything as true. I mean, what was crazy, I had a big training program with 100 teachers, and I said, how many want your students to be critical thinkers when they come out of your class? Hands go up. Everybody wants their students to be critical thinkers. How many are actually teaching a lesson in critical thinking in your class? 3 hands. They all want it. Nobody does it. Yes, and if I really got into that, do teachers want their students to think critically about what they're telling them? Of course not. I'm the teacher. I'm telling you the truth. You need to learn that. We're going to have a test next week. You got to memorize all this stuff. They don't want them to think, why am I learning this? What the value of this is. Now, students are thinking that all the time. My older daughter, who was not the student at all, was always, we had a table in our dining room that we call the math table, because that's where torture took place. I would torture her to try and figure out what her algebra homework was, and she would torture me by being very stubborn. I don't understand it. I don't want to do this, blah, blah, blah. And so she got so good at it. And I'm not a very angry person, but I would get so angry. And then she said, I guess I can't do this anymore, and she'd leave. She knew exactly how to turn me on and do that. That was a skill. So yes, we should. So there should be alternative perspectives shared in the classroom so that we get good at using our own skill to judge. Today, alternative facts and the internet and all the stuff we're reading, that should be what's called media literacy. How much are we really teaching that in school? Not when you're reading a textbook that's all true, that everybody has vetted, that the state says this is what you should be learning. So I don't think you learn to do that once you're out of school. You should be learning to do that in school, in places like reading alternative, alt facts, alternative perspectives. Why this might be true? Which part of this could be true? Which part of this is not something you accept? Yeah, please. Go ahead. Well, sure, of course. Up, lady, excuse me. She got to turn it on. Oh, is that on? Can you? Yeah, she's turning you on.
Okay. Wonderful. The thing is that, I don't want. I'm going to be a little bit controversial.
Please,
okay?
please, yes, we'll
Because
practice this.
I don't get. The thing is that I love what you say.
Yes.
But I don't see the point on why you work with the opposites. So in the sense, for me, I see just in case and just in time,
Yes.
and I like both of them.
Yeah, they could be. Yeah.
So I don't need to be on favor of just in time.
Yes.
I don't need to kill the
No.
just in case.
Yes, you're right.
So
I agree with
because I think that for some instances, it's good for me to have people that know by heart many things, and that because they come to your mind easily. So, and I see some advantages on this.
Mm-hmm.
I see disadvantages on that being my only source of knowledge or my only way of educating.
Yes, right.
But the same happens with the other one.
Yeah, right. It
So-
can't be all. It can't be all.
So
one or the
I
other.
see your proposal as something that is add a lot of value to the educational field, but I don't kill the other one.
Yes.
I don't want to kill it. Maybe,
Right.
we have to kill it. For me, I don't know. I like it in many instances.
Well,
Not as, I don't know.
so let me ask you, how would you introduce this concept? You're right. I'm not saying 100% one or the other. Have smart people. I mean, I'm doing this right now. This is a lecture. This is the old way of teaching, right? It's comfortable getting a lot of information across. If we did this by discovery method in a workshop format, it would take us at least all day, if not a couple of days. Okay, and that may be a better way of learning, but you don't have a couple of days. So this is a very efficient way of doing instruction learning. How would you present this slide? So that your point is correct. It's got to be both.
I don't have more to say.
Actually, really turned the table on you. I ask you to be a teacher.
I mean, I just say that I like both. So I will emphasize that our educational system is, most of them, just in case. So I need to keep the balance. So I need to take not so much, to take the importance from the just in case to the just in time, but both.
Let me answer my own question.
Yeah.
A very simple little slide change. Put and.
That's it. Yeah, that's very good.
Okay, so I should do that. I appreciate that. That's a good idea. We're teaching young people some classes in the UK by remote, and last week they learned about the SDGs, and this next week they're going to learn about futures thinking. The assignment between those two, whether they do them or not, something else, is that they have to go find a forecast of the SDG that they've chosen. Find it somewhere on the. So I'm using the just in time. I'm not saying here's a forecast of poverty, here's a forecast of climate change. You go find one, and you go use your resources, find it, bring it to the class next week, and I will show you how to think about that and how to do that. So you're right. It has to be both.
And at the same time, it goes back. It's like a circle.
Oh yeah.
Just in case goes takes you to the just.
Yeah, right. And it's reciprocal. Yeah, it goes back and forth. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I tend to be too excited about the new and not trying to preserve the benefits of the old, which are obviously there. Okay, what's the difference between questions and problems on the left versus questions and problems on the right? I've already said it, so you're allowed to repeat me. Okay, that's an excellent distinction. Yes, I hadn't thought of that, frankly. We tend to learn in school as individuals. We take tests. We get evaluated as individuals. We tend to work, we're supposed to work in work and as adults in collaboration with others. That's not what I had in mind when I created this, but I appreciate that. The other thing is that there's right answers to what they're being asked on the left. Math problem, science problem, history problem. There's no right answer when you're actually solving a problem at work or in life or you're in your family or at the town hall in the community meeting. There's no right answer. There are many good answers. There are many bad answers. And the skill is then to discuss what's good about this answer, what's not so good, what evidence do you have, what are the consequences, which one are we going to choose, realizing that there's no right, perfect answer. And the problem we have, I think, in modern society comes right out of education. Throughout our whole educational system, we've been taught to look and be successful when we got the right answer. And when we get out of school, hardly ever is there a right answer that is always right and completely right. So we're not having the skill of using our judgment and critical thinking, evaluating the evidence, trying to decide for ourselves what we think is more true or less true, not using our values. So, and so the fact that we have a society, and I'm talking more about the United States as the prime example of this, where everybody's just yelling at each other. I mean, you can't have a school board meeting in a small town in the U.S. without the police being there because everybody's going to get so excited and start throwing chairs. Oh my gosh, what have we come to? Now here I'm sounding like an old guy, sounding like my father, yelling at the television in the 1990s. So I've turned out to be a lot like him. But because we have not really learned how to dialogue, how to listen to somebody else, how to evaluate whether our answer is better or worse. There's always better or worse. but it's not about right and wrong. So it's a continuum. There is better and worse. It's not completely relative. Not everything is equal. But the first thing I would do is say, let's get rid of right and wrong. Let's start talking about better and worse on some kind of a continuum. Maybe it's 80% right. Maybe it's only 20% right. And after dialogue and we evaluate, we listen to other people, we come up. Now, we don't have to agree with those people. We still, after the discussion, we may not agree with them, but we see their point. And we're at least able to have, and we may actually move closer to a consensus, to 50-50, once we hear what other people have been able to do. So, where do students learn this? How to evaluate information, how to have a discussion about this. I claim not in school usually, because they're being taught what's right in most of their classes. And finally, let me conclude with this example, this story. Alverno College, women's college in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was actually a college for nuns in the Catholic Church in the 1950s and 60s. Lots of people going into the church, a lot of people becoming priests, a lot of people becoming nuns, and then the 60s came along and they all left, myself included. We all left. So this college was about to go out of existence, literally. Their whole market, their whole student body was leaving. They only had a few nuns left. So the president of that college called required faculty meetings once every 2 weeks, Friday afternoon. The whole faculty had to attend, and every Friday, one department had to stand up and answer the question, what is your contribution to the liberal education of women? What is your contribution? So history had to answer that. Math had to answer that. They had a nursing program. They had to answer that. It wasn't, oh, they need to know the battles of, such and such war, or they need to know how to factor that trinomial equation. No, they all came up with all kinds of great things that they said they were teaching their students, like these things: communication, critical thinking, imagination, global perspective, effective citizenship. They came up with these 8 things at the end of this whole exercise and said, we should be teaching this. Not instead of, but in addition to, we teach the math and the history and whatever. I think most schools and most teachers would agree with that. The beautiful thing about Alverno College is that they did something about it. They created a new structure. The faculty were actually assigned to 2 departments. One department was their traditional discipline, and the other department was one of these skill sets. And they created a 4-year curriculum of how to become an effective citizen. They created a 4-year curriculum on how to do valuing and value clarification. I went to a training there in the 1990s. The assessment, we were allowed to sit into one of the assessments. It was in a round theater, amphitheater, and the students were sitting around the table, and they were practicing communication and problem solving as a group. And they had a rubric: what makes for a good group discussion? Are you contributing? Are you listening? Are you agreeing? Are you disagreeing respectfully? And every student in the amphitheater had a volunteer from the community evaluating how well they did. Did I hear you listening? Did I hear you contributing? All of that. And the students knew what they were doing, and they were being evaluated and assessed on the skill, not on the knowledge, but on the skill of could they participate in dialogue in a group to solve a problem. Beautiful. And they got that feedback at the end. You did this really well, and these are the things you need to work on. And they layered that through 4 years. Every class had 2 or 3 of these things that in the course of that class, whether it was a nursing class or a history class, they had to cover also the steps on the process. They created this enormous curriculum. 5%, which sounds like not a big number, 5% of the college budget went into assessment. That was not easy to set up that thing with community volunteers and students and come up with the whole thing. They had videotapes. They said, we didn't see it, but the most dramatic difference was they videotaped the incoming freshmen giving a talk and the outgoing seniors giving a talk. it was like night and day. It was like, and so those women graduating from that place, they claimed, and I think it's probably true, were snapped up immediately by the businesses, by the governments, by the agencies around that city, because they knew how to do things. They didn't just have lots of knowledge, they knew how to do things. And in that sense, they were practicing this kind of thing. So this is what the skills that educational leaders have asked for, what business recruiters have asked for. And we could read through this list. How many lessons are there in any of these things? How many, and one of the most disappointing and disheartening things in education is that nothing scales. Nothing scales unless it's mandated by the government. So Alverno College, which has created this enormously successful skill-based curriculum for women in college, 0 imitators. Nobody does this because, oh, well, that's nice for them. We don't have to do that. It'll be too hard. It doesn't fit our profile. Blah, 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 blah. If you had a college and you were guaranteeing your product promise, your brand promise was that your graduates would know how to do these things, would have these skills, I suggest that that would be, and that answers your question, that if that were the norm, then everybody would be doing it in order to be competitive, in order to have those kinds of things. And that changes, however, how we learn. If we're transmitting knowledge, it's one structure. Lecture, textbooks, tests. If we're acquiring skills, it's a different structure. A little bit of instruction, but lots of practice. And we evaluate it differently. We evaluate it by evaluating behaviors, not what people are writing on a test. All those kinds of things. So this is the last point. If we wanted to transform education, teaching about the future, where there are no facts going in, is a great way to start, because we learn to investigate, to gather information, to evaluate alternative perspectives, to decide what our values are, which is preferred and which is not. It's a great vehicle for doing that. If skills are more important than merely information, not without information, but mere information, where students learn to use that information and where they are engaged in what's going on in the world today. What happened in history, what's going on today, what issues they may be confronting in the future. Not that they're going to learn to solve the problem of climate change, but they're aware of what's happening and they're beginning to think as citizens, as parents, as workers, what should I be doing to make a better world? That's the kind of world. So that's what we want. Prepare students for tomorrow by teaching the future today. That's my pitch. What do you think, huh? Paula's a very good friend, so she can start. Questions, comments? We got a few minutes left. Juan, you want to give any closing comments? Are you ready to go talk to somebody about this? I know that's, I'm asking you to take a risk here. Talk to your teachers. Talk to your coworkers. Talk to your school board. I don't know if you elect school board representatives or the principals at your kids' schools. Talk to your neighbors. Let's get that demand signal started. And I think there are people here in Biscay and Bilbao that want to do this. I thank BBK for giving us this opportunity for yesterday's Trend Research Conference and for allowing us to organize in this place. I think there is a beginning here to get something started. And I can tell you, if Bilbao does this, you'll be the first community in the world to have done it. I wish there were more, but to be first is still an open slot. Nobody is yet first. Nobody's done it, and you could actually do it. So you may be the beginning of doing that. I ask you to be change agents. I ask you to act, use your outbound change. Use whatever influence you have to do that. Juan, you want to take us home? No. Is it click? No, you got to turn it on.
I can. So, I think. So my only question is.
Excuse us. You're only question, Juan? You have more than one question.
No, I have. The thing is that, well, thank you, because it was very interesting, very challenging at the same time. For me, yeah, I think it's like you contagious enthusiasm. I don't know how to say that in English, but like it's kind of. But the thing is that when I see this, I don't know what you think, but cuando yo veo esto, lo que pienso es, oh, qué cosa más bonita, qué interesante, pero digo, bueno, ¿y cómo se hace? O sea, es como en la línea de lo que tú preguntabas, porque esto es mucho más difícil. I don't know if you got any guidelines or any how-to process or whatever, or any recommendations, because you are launching us like a challenge, but you left us clueless. I mean, we don't have any. We do. I don't know. Maybe.
Well, one of the...
But when do you
yeah.
take the stage? Because I am
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
I don't know if this is not my place.
I talked about inbound, outbound change. Inbound change is easier to teach because there is a better way than the old way. The old way was scientific explanation, exploration, linear extrapolation, econometrics. We invented that in the 20th century, and it was a good way of doing it. Before that, we didn't even have that. People were just making the future up, essentially. We had that helps. Now we're saying yes, but, and do the alternatives and do the preferred. So I can teach that fairly straightforward. When I get to outbound change, which is what you're asking, how do we go about creating and influencing the world? There's not one right way to do it in our society. There's people who believe in grassroots change. There's people who believe in top-down change. There's people who believe they invent new technologies that create change. There's people who are protesting in the streets and create change. There is hundreds of different ways. And you can go to the library, which I have, and read all those. There are library shelves full of how to create change. So I have a presentation on how to create change, but it's not so clear. It's emphasis, it's guidelines, work with others, have a meeting, establish your values, talk to influential people, make a case. I've got materials on all that. In terms of where to go and what step-by-step is, I'm afraid I would be doing a disservice to you if I said, here's how you go about doing that. There are ways of doing it, and I can send those materials, but in terms of, so how do you, so what this is my case in point. We never learned that. We learned how to factor a trinomial equation, and we didn't learn how to create change. Duh! and we didn't practice it. We didn't create the skill of doing it. Because in school, when we were all in school, we were never required to do so. Now, sometimes at work we are. If you're in a nonprofit, you're trying to, raise money, or you're trying to change poverty or any of these SDGs in the world, and then you're trying to create change. Frankly, you've had to learn that since you were in school. And so that, to me, is my case in point. The reason that you asked the question, you're very successful, entrepreneur, professor, et cetera, the fact that you don't know how to create change, I don't know how to create change, we don't know how to change society, we don't know how to change our organizations and our communities, is a gigantic lack in the world today. When we have so many challenges and so many things that could be so much better, we all want that better future, but our educational institutions are leaving us bereft. It's like now we have to learn math after school when we never learned it in school. Well, that would be hard to do. Creating change is exactly the same. It's a skill. And how do you dribble a football? Well, there are different people will do it a little bit differently, and different coaches will emphasize different things, and you have to know yourself and your body and what the situation is on the pitch when you're doing all that. It's very complex, but at least we should have had some preparation for how to create change. And if you had that preparation, and if your children could have that preparation, they will be a lot more successful at work and within their own families than without that preparation. Because right now, we're stymied. We're paralyzed. We have all these problems, and we don't know where to start. So I'm turning the question back to you. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I mean, here's a professor, I'm criticizing. But none of us learned that. I don't know how to do that. I'm trying to create change. I'm running Teach the Future. I created Teach the Future to introduce education. So that happened 10 years ago. How many schools? 2 or 3. Only 2 or 3 in the whole world? Yes. I don't know how to do it. You have to use your creativity, your time, your community, your influence, the people whom you know to gather together to create that demand signal. And how that is by collaborating, by being clear about what your goals are, by talking to the right people, gathering support, both money and political support and all that. I mean, we could create a roadmap, but everybody, every community will do it differently. And there's no way, there's no recipe. It's not like making a cake or writing a research report, which is all structured. It's pretty open. Appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Bueno, yo soy Paola Caballero, formo parte del hub de España, acompaño a Peter, a Lourdes, Pilar y Sandra en el...
Sube aquí al estado.
Is she turning you back on?
Que eso, que yo acompaño a Peter en el hub de España y solo por aterrizaros un poco el trabajo que desde la asociación estamos haciendo en España, creo que sí que es un buen comienzo que si pertenecéis a una comunidad educativa, bien a través de una asociación de padres o bien porque seáis directores de centro, jefes de estudio o docentes, es un buen comienzo que el currículum educativo, que la filosofía del centro esté alineada con lo que Peter acababa de ilustrar antes, ¿no? Que ya normalmente suelen ser centros privados, pero es verdad que tienen un currículum mucho más orientado a lo que después las universidades y los trabajos pues están demandando, ¿no? Mucho más enfocado al desarrollo de skills.
This is the specific answer.
Well, I'm the professor. I never give specific answers. No,
You are
what-
inspiring.
okay, good, excellent. Thank you, Paulo. Let me give one further idea, however, and I had to change my mind about change from when I was young. I wanted change to grow out of the community, out of the people, very much of grassroots. I had to change that view. Change begins with leaders. Leaders are those who originally stand up, raise their hand, and say, I will take the responsibility to enroll people in a process of change. Each of you can be one of those in your own way, in your own community, in your own organizations, to be leaders. That's not an easy task. It's not a safe task. But the offer is for you to be a leader if you believe in it, and if not this, pick something else. We got 18 SDGs, and you can be a leader in any one of those. I really urge you to seriously consider leadership. You don't have to own anything. You don't have to be in charge of anything. Leaders are not authorities necessarily. They're not presidents. They're not mayors. They're not Council people, they're the public, a public person who says, I have a preferred future and I would like you to help me. We can work together to create that. So there's a specific answer too. Be a leader. Were you taught that in school? Everybody wanted you to be a leader, but they didn't teach you how to do that. And we could have a longer discussion about that too. Thank you.
Y ese liderazgo viene también muchas veces acompañado de las instituciones. Que podamos también hacer un poco el cambio desde la comunidad. ¿Vale?
I have to tell you, I don't want to be a leader. I want to be a professor. I want to understand. I was not on the front lines. I was walking around with a clipboard, watching and learning how it was going because I wanted to be an observer. I did not want to be a player. But when I retired, I said, somebody should take the lead and do this. And I said, it probably should be me. And it's been me up till now. Not very well, I frankly tell you. I don't know how to be a leader either. Thank you, Paula. That's wonderful. Okay, Juan, any other questions, comments, answers? No? Okay, you want to all go home? Time for lunch, right? Thank you very much.